From Esperance, I head towards Albany. The nights are getting a little cooler now, but my planning has proven successful. My merino wool clothing keeping the chill out. I go through a town called Ravensthorpe. I pick up a tourist brochure and read about a memorial 15 kilometres out of town. It pricked up my interest because the description was so nondescript. The beautiful valley of Cocanerup has been shrouded under the shadows of sadness for 135 years. The Noongar, which is a West Australian word for Aborigines, befriended the newcomers, showing them fresh water and helping them protect their sheep against the ravages of dingo attack. But it all went terribly wrong. Crimes were committed, lives were lost, and the Noongar families left the district. Visiting the memorial didn't really shed more light on what had happened. In 1880, a settler, John Dunn, one of three brothers, was approached by a Noongar execution party of 4 and killed in payback for an unmentioned crime. One white was killed, and in retaliation, nearly a whole tribe of Noongar were exterminated. But why? Why this whitewashing? What the hell happened out here? I get online and find 2 different versions of the one story. According to the genealogy page of the Dunn family, terrible stories abound, but cannot be verified, of the vengeance exacted by John's brothers on the Noongars. One story is that a number of Aborigines were killed and buried in a mass grave near John's grave. The rest of the Noongars were chased eastward, the Dunns poisoning the waterholes to prevent them from returning. The Noongar version is a little more forthright. John Dunn raped a 13-year-old Noongar girl by the name of Esmeralda Dab. Tribal law dictated that his payback be death by spearing. When a Noongar suspect was acquitted of the murder, the other Dunn brothers and a group of armed settlers sought revenge, rounding up and slaughtering around 30 to 35 men, women and children. Noongar don't return to this area, believing the spirits of the dead haunt it. I suppose a memorial is a small step in the right direction to acknowledging our past, a lifting of the shadow, as the candy-coated tourism brochure suggested. Head on down the road and hit some weather. I pull into a service station. It is interesting how the mining industry has affected pricing in the West. Everything is just a little bit more expensive. But this place took things to an extreme that is just plain exploitive. These pricks wanted to charge for air, $1 per tyre, just to pump them up. I ride through the Fitzgerald Biosphere Reserve, an area of 800,000 acres, which has over 18,000 species of plants. I take a walk through a local garden, marvelling at the colours and patterns of the indigenous flowers. About 25 kilometres out of Albany, I see something I haven't seen for a while, and I must say I've missed. Rolling green fields and tall tree forests. I roll into Albany and decide to book a room in a hostel. I found one on Stirling Terrace, which features impressive colonial architecture. Albany is a port city and the oldest settlement in Western Australia. I instantly warm to the place. It feels like a real town, not just some place created because of a money pit in the ground. It has farmer and crafts markets, cute French cafes, and a charming vista overlooking the bay. I meet an interesting crew at the hostel, a bunch of guys who all know each other. The philosopher Joe, Simon the Bavarian, Colin, the only other Aussie in the hostel, June the Korean prankster, and the enigmatic Kieran, who only briefly visits some nights and would always have his head in his computer. Kieran had sold a house in the UK and was cashed up. He was living his dream of producing an album and would spend his days up on a local bush hill working on his recordings, only occasionally returning to the hostel to meet his crew. He paid the other guys accommodation and gave them a weekly payment of $500. I'm not really sure what they were supposed to be doing, but Colin, the pure-hearted Aussie, was making the most of the situation, cracking beers at 10 a.m. and spending his days fishing from the pier and playing pool. The hostel mainly catered for those working in town with visas. Their choices of work were a local abattoirs or picking grapes. I was lucky to spend a Friday night in the hostel, and it was a joy to experience this multicultural mix. Out the back were the Germans, drinking beer and heavy liquor. Move on into the kitchen to find Asians, mainly Koreans, drinking whiskey and hot chocolate. The kitchen was the scene of a Euro disco, with the Italians providing the beats. The girls weren't going anywhere, but made an effort to dress up anyway, as is the Italian style. Out the back, in the smoking section, you'd find the North Africans, keen to get you drunk on their liquor and talk with a real Australian. Joe the philosopher was interested in my visit to North Korea. He told me he wished for a united Korea, believing the muscle of the North and the brains of the South would form a mighty nation. I admired his optimism, if not a little concerned by his talk of pure blood. I had an experience of racism in Korea, and to understand this, and in fact to understand any race of people, I looked at their history. Korea is surrounded on all sides by enemies. In order to survive, the people had to work together and had to believe they were better than the other. Is this wrong? Is it wrong to hold on to cultural distinction? And what of a culture like Australia, with each new wave of immigrants adding to the mix? Is it wrong to be proud of what already has formed? I sometimes feel the Australian city-centric public media put down the culture of the bush. It's pure class snobbery and lack of understanding. They're happy to feature raw and edgy aspects of the outback culture, like tent boxing, but these stories are so few and far between, most content being related to the inner city aspirations of a sheltered cultural elite. Everything about my stay in the hostel was wonderful, even the old Federation building that apparently housed Anzacs before they went off to war. At night the old girl would talk to you, the floorboards creaking 1,000 stories. But everything must end, and at the moment I have little incoming, so I head out bush again, missing my newfound friends as the rain set in. The Aboriginals called Albany Place of Rain and had an interesting settlement story. Makari, the local Noongar leader, welcomed the Europeans, showing them their walking trails, which have since become roads. He became close friends with the colony's doctor. When he died in 1831, he was buried behind the town hall. When Dr. Colley himself died of tuberculosis 4 years later, he wished to be buried beside his great friend Makari. I went in search of the gravesite, but alas found a senior citizens centre instead. Old bones on old bones. I later read the gravesite had been exhumed and moved to the Albany cemetery. What a lost opportunity. A great story of two cultures coming together as one. No bloodshed, no rape, and no problems. At least not until the question of who really owns the land was raised.